Introductions. So I'm Helen Niblock. I'm Head of Regional Engagement for the North East, Yorkshire and Humber. I've also got my colleagues with us today, Joe Shearing, who's Head of Regional Engagement for the East Midlands, and Sinead Balgobin, who's Head of Regional Engagement for the West Midlands. And we've also got Anne Chalkley, Portfolio Manager, who'll be supporting us in the background, as well as Lauren Millichip, who's supporting in the background as well. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get into the main presentation. If you have got any questions, please type them into the Q&A box so that we can keep track of them. The presentation will be in a number of sections, and we'll pause at the end of each section for questions. So please do type your questions as we go along. And we'll also have some time at the end for questions as well. We might not get through all of the questions that are asked today, but we will write up the answers to all the questions that we receive and publish them along with the slides in a few weeks. And if you can, we'd like to see who you are. So if you're happy to share your name when you're asking your questions, please do. We'll answer any general questions, but if you've got any specific questions about proposals that you're developing or anything about project partners, for example, then please send it to the PBIAA inbox. And as you might have just heard, we are recording the webinar as well, so we will share the recording along with the slides and the Q&A. And just a reminder that you can find all of the details about the funding opportunity on the funding finder. There's a lot of information on that page, so please do read it carefully so that you can understand the scope, what we're looking for, and how to apply. And hopefully we'll cover a lot of that this afternoon as well. So we've got, I say, a few sections to cover. We'll talk about what is a PBIAA, what we're looking for, what can be supported through the PBIAA, the kind of different types of consortia that you could consider. And the main difference for this round to what we did last year is that the application is all through the new funding service and the TFS. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So myself and Joe will alternate through the different sections, so you're not just hearing all from me. And then we've got the time at the end for the Q&A as well. So as a bit of background to the place-based IA, I just wanted to highlight and hopefully remind you all of the UKRI strategy that was published last year. So it focuses around 6 strategic objectives, and place is one of them. And the place objective also covers financial sustainability of research and making sure that we're funding cutting-edge infrastructure. But the priority of most relevance to the EPSRC regional engagement team and to the place-based IA is around strengthening clusters and partnerships. So what we're doing with the PBIAA clearly aligns to the UKRI strategy. And following on from that, all of the councils of UKRI published their 3-year delivery plans as well, and they're structured around the same 6 strategic objectives. And the PBIAA is a key delivery mechanism for strengthening clusters across the UK nations and regions as part of that place objective for EPSRC, and we've committed to that within our delivery plan. So within our team of heads of regional engagement, we all work across our regions and nations of the UK. We also work together to think about what we mean by place, and that's been evolving over the last few years as we're developing the concept. And I just wanted to share with you how we're currently thinking about place, and we've got these 3 areas of focus. So we all work in our places around the UK and understanding those local, regional and national insights, talking to lots of different types of stakeholders so that we can understand the strengths and priorities across the UK to be able to inform our national strategy. And through this stakeholder engagement, we're listening to a diversity of voices and different stakeholders in different places. And we also want to be able to understand the impacts and benefits of the investments that we're making, what impacts that's having on places. And as we're considering new investment opportunities, how those can be aligned to place-based priorities, working with our colleagues across EPSRC and UKRI. And thirdly, we're also looking at the distribution of our portfolio, so where the investment is being made. We've got various data tools to do that, and there will be certain funding opportunities where we will look at the geographical balance of where our investments are being made. So onto the place-based IAA. This is our flagship place-focused funding, and we're pleased to be running a second round of the scheme. So the scheme aims to support engineering and physical sciences researchers to realise the impact of their research and to support the development of a target industrial cluster in collaboration with civic partners to enhance regional growth. So the PBIAA should be targeted at a scientific theme and a place and focused on developing a cluster. It should be delivered through a consortium involving at least 2 universities and co-created with civic bodies and local businesses. And we're doing this scheme because we want to complement the standard impact acceleration account by increasing the intensity of impact activity that's aligned to a specific sector and cluster, as well as contributing to regional growth and widening the access to EPSRC impact funding, so it's an open competition. So the impact activities that are delivered through the place-based IAA should have relevance to the local economy. We want to see you aligning the impact and translation activities to local strategic intent, but it should be based on an engineering and physical sciences research portfolio at the universities. And you should be engaging with local stakeholders during both the design and the delivery of the PBIAA. And as with the standard IAA, it's flexible funding, and it should be used in an agile way to benefit those local needs and areas that might be developing. I'll talk more about the types of clusters and consortia later, but just to flag the image on the right-hand side there is a hypothetical example. So in this example, we've put the cluster in South Wales, which is within the dotted line. The consortium members can be from within and outside of the cluster, so the red pins on the map there, and working with partners through the collaboration fund, which are the blue dots. And I'll talk more about that later as well. So I've got some of the impacts and benefits that we'd like to see from the PBIAAs on this slide here. Now, this list is not exhaustive, and we recognise that some impacts will be longer term than others, and you may not see all of these impacts within the 4 years of the PBIAA, but we'd expect to see progress towards some of these types of impacts, and it is what is appropriate to your cluster and your project. But some examples could include local and regional economic growth, skills development, job creation or retention, cluster development, which could include knowledge diffusion, supply chain development, the growth of small and medium-sized enterprises, and the generation of spin-outs. And we'd also like to see the private investment increase within that place and that cluster. And we could also see the development of infrastructures as appropriate to that cluster, with the involvement investment of different partners alongside the PBIAA. So a reminder that the partnerships are really at the heart of the place-based IAAs. We want to see that genuine co-creation and delivery between the university consortium members and with the civic and the business partners to ensure that the research strengths match the needs of the place. And that is part of the reason why this call is open for a lot longer than a lot of our standard funding opportunities, to be able to give you that opportunity to fully engage with your partners. So we opened the call the end of October, and it's open until late March. So giving you that real opportunity to fully engage with your partners. And we know that it's quite a different kind of relationship, particularly because we want you to engage with civic bodies. They should be a project partner, and it's a requirement of the call to engage with those civic partners. And we define a civic body as an organisation that has a mandate from the local population and an interest or responsibility for the development of the place. Some examples, again, not an exhaustive list, but some examples that we do consider to have a civic role could include enterprise development or skills bodies, local authorities, councils, combined authorities, growth city and region deals, particularly in the devolved administrations. And you could consider the devolved administrations themselves and their agencies, but recognising that the PBIAA should be focused on a sub-national level, not the whole of Scotland, for example. You could also consider regional or local industrial bodies or NHS trusts as well. So if you do have questions about a specific body of whether they're eligible, please do come and speak to us. And we understand that civic organisations have limited budgets and resource. So we want to see what kinds of contributions they are making to the project, but the panel will take the context of their contributions into consideration and the alignment of the strategies. So we're not necessarily looking at just the monetary value of those contributions. And some examples of how those civic bodies could be involved. So they could be involved in the governance structures, in the management or the selection of projects. They could be providing access to their innovation or knowledge exchange activities to align to the PBIAA. There could be secondments between the academics and the civic bodies, as well as with the businesses as well. They could be helping support or facilitate the networking or engagement beyond the consortium. So allowing the academic community access to their business networks, for example. Or they could be supporting the policy development and delivery, as well as the direct adoption of research outputs, or providing market assessments, or provision of infrastructure. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the kind of thing that we're expecting. And I've got some real life examples later on. So we're really pleased to announce our successful round 1 projects last month. And there's a news item on the EPSRC website that gives you further details of what they are. I just wanted to run through a summary of what we supported. So we received 38 applications, and that was covering all nations and regions of the UK. And we ended up funding 10 PBIAAs, a mixture of established and emerging clusters. And due to the quality of the bids, we were able to put extra money towards the first round. So we were split 25 million across the 2 rounds. We managed to find some extra money to put in 41 million for the first round, but it now does mean that we've now got 20 million for this current round. And we're really pleased to see that we've got about 100 project partners, both businesses and civic partners across those 10 bids, as well as around £8 million of contributions from those project partners. And due to the flexible nature of the PBIAAs, we do expect the number of project partners and contributions to increase over the lifetime of the awards as well. And that's something that we'll be keeping track of. And one of the aims of the scheme is to broaden the involvement of universities beyond those that have a current standard EPSRC IAA. And of those that were involved in the 10 projects that we funded, 13 out of those 30 are new to the EPSRC impact funding, which we're pleased to see. And the map on the right-hand side there highlights all of the project partners that were involved in the successful round 1 bids. So the red pins are the project leads, and the blue ones are the project partners, or the partner universities. And this slide provides a little bit more detail on the projects that we've funded. So you can see the range of different types of institutions, and just from the titles of the projects, you can see the range of topics that we've covered. So we've got net zero, materials, manufacturing, healthcare, agriculture. So a good range of different types of sectors and technologies, and across the EPSRC remit. So you can see the breadth of projects that we've funded. And as I mentioned, we have a broad range of project partners. And just to provide some real life examples of those civic bodies that are on the projects that we've funded, at the bottom there, you can see that we've got the Welsh Government, so a national government, city council, local governments, combined authorities, health agencies, and business groups as well. So a good spread of different types of partners, and it is what is appropriate to the place and the cluster that you are looking to work with. So that's the end of that first section of an overview of what a PBIAA is, and we'll pause here for questions. And we just wanted to also cover some of those frequently asked questions, particularly those that we got in round one. So as I just run through the answers to these questions here, please do submit any questions that you've got that have related to the section that I've just covered. And if it's a question about something we might cover later, we might not answer it just now. So we have been asked, can an industry body or club act as the civic body? So yes, as you can see from the examples that I've just provided, we do have some examples of business organisations on the current projects. So as long as the organisation has a focus on a specific place, then they could be considered as a civic organisation. Around the question of should we be pushing impact from our research portfolio or doing what is required by the place? It's both really. So you want to be driving impact from the consortium portfolio, and we want to see that base of research activity, but you also need to be connecting with the civic partner to align to their ambitions and plans, and not just pushing the research out. It needs to be a collaboration and for the needs of both partners. So we want to be doing both of those to be able to contribute to the development and growth of the cluster. And we've also had quite a few questions around, can funds go to companies or civic partners? So the answer is no. So we can only fund eligible research organisations, so universities and other UKRI eligible research organisations. The businesses and civic partners can collaborate on the projects, and we'd expect them to be contributing to those projects, either cash or in kind. But if the companies or civic partners are running a specific piece of work for the project, there could be a case for subcontracting. And we really think that the businesses and the civic partners will benefit from collaborating and contributing to the PBIAA, because there will be money coming into their cluster, into their place. There'll be knowledge exchange. They'll be benefiting from the academic expertise, and it's projects that they are interested in, and therefore it's lowering the risk of projects that they could have funded themselves by collaborating with EPSRC funding. So I'll pause there for any more questions.
I actually think, Helen, that we don't have any live questions at the moment linked to that section. So if we can carry on into my sections, I think, and then we'll wrap up any questions that come to people's minds later on in the process.
Okay, thank you. So I'll hand over to Joe for the next section.
So I'm going to take you now through a little bit about what we're looking for in your applications, as it should say. So here are selections of musts. Some of these you may picked up on, and indeed they're all the same as they were in the first round. So proposals must be co-created with a civic actor, and indeed aligned to the civic ambitions of the place you identify. We would be wishing to see clear evidence of engagement with local business or other relevant stakeholders. And in terms of the consortium, while you can involve other types of research organisations and bodies, it must involve at least 2 universities. In terms of how you're defining what you're going to be doing with your money, you have quite a lot of flexibility, but you must include and state a value for a flexible consortium fund. So that will be funds primarily targeted at the consortium members, and also separately a collaboration fund, which you would be using to draw on the full breadth of UK R&D activity and outputs of relevance to your PBIAA. And we show the key dates there in terms of an intent to submit form, which we are just using to inform our planning for the peer review process. It's not a mandatory, but anything you can give us to give us some idea of scale of demand is very helpful. And indeed the closing date, which obviously is a mandatory and fixed date. So moving on to delivery, as Helen mentioned, in this round, I'm sure we'll always be seeking more money, but we have currently £20 million available to us. And that, the slide has vanished for me, but we'll wait for it to come back. But anyway, and that will be available through 2 funding streams. One funding stream for what you would describe to us as being an emerging or nascent cluster, where we're expecting or hoping to fund between 2 and 4 awards with a maximum of £2.5 million per award. And I can confirm that is the cost to EPSRC. with the way costings work, the total project cost may be slightly higher. And then the other stream is for established or mature clusters, where again, we'll be estimating between 2 and 4 awards with a maximum of 5 million per award from EPSRC. These are over a suggested 4-year duration. And in terms of how you request your funding, management costs can be funded at 80% FEC, but all of your project funds can be requested as directly incurred at 100% FEC. Obviously, we can answer specific costing questions on any projects you might have as you develop your proposals. In terms of eligibility, we want the project lead to be a domain expert from an organization eligible for UKRI funding. So in contrast to, for example, our standard institutional IAAs, where often it might be the Pro Vice Chancellor or similar, due to the thematic nature of our PBIAAs, we are looking for that domain expertise. Our standard UKRI eligibility criteria applies, and each institution may only submit one application as a lead, but you can be involved in a number of other applications as co-leads or co-investigators. In terms of that consortium, again, just to note that you need to be collaborating as a university with at least one other university, and indeed there must be the involvement of at least one clearly defined civic body. Civic and business is key to this, and so we would expect to see project partners in those domains as well, and an explanation of how those have been engaged with and how those will be supporting the delivery of your PBIAA. As well as the project lead, we would expect the team to include all relevant domain expertise, and indeed potentially or likely an articulation of experience in also delivering this sort of impact funding or similar KE funding mechanisms. In terms of your proposal costings, just to restate again that management costs can be taken as 80% of the full economic cost, and you may apply for up to 15% of your budget to a total maximum or to a maximum of £500,000 in this area. This can include PI and co-I time to support the management of the award, and indeed other roles such as, for example, a PBI manager or similar type of administrative role in terms of the management of your scheme. Whereas we would expect your consortium impact activities and collaborative fund to be requested as 100% directly incurred costs, and we do include more guidance on this on the funding finder and other guidance. You can seek items of equipment between £10,000 and £400,000. We would expect to see a robust strategic case for how this equipment will maximize the impact from the research. And the purpose of equipment, just to be very clear, to undertake non-impact focused research is out of scope for this opportunity. So for example, one could imagine you seeking funding for some sort of demonstrator equipment linked to impact activities. Something in that sort of space is what we might see as being eligible. In the decision-making process, there is no postal peer review in this. Instead, as was the case with round one, applications will be assessed by an expert peer review panel. And to note that that will include both domain experts, but also experts in impact and knowledge exchange activities, and indeed regional development type activities. So do bear that in mind as you develop your proposals and in reference to our assessment criteria. Highly ranked proposals from that peer review panel will be invited to interview and will have the opportunity to respond to panel comments before interview. That's those that are invited to interview. As we go through that process and also at that interview process, we will be looking to build a portfolio of PBIAA awards that are balanced geographically and by application domain and stream coverage. We have the EPSC resubmission policy is in place, but we do also reserve the right to invite resubmissions. So that covers a little bit about what we are looking for. And I look forward to some questions on that shortly. But I'll also move on to what activities a PBIAA can support before we take those questions. So for those that are familiar with our standard or institutional impact acceleration accounts, it's exactly the same or very similar in terms of the types of activities. But here we give a non-exhaustive list of the types of things we would consider that you might wish to highlight that you you believe your place needs. So that could be around engaging users and forging new partnerships, building a cluster's capability and culture. So that could be, for example, training or other development work that needs to be done in that place. We'd need assurance that that was very specific to your PBIA rather than, for example, impact training in general sense in a place. Progress or progressing research outputs towards commercial opportunities. Thinking about things like proof of concept projects, market validation, and indeed the all-important policy and other third sector activities that might support impact from EPS research outputs. As noted, there is this mandatory collaborative fund, and this is just noting that whoever is in your consortium, that will not encapsulate all potentially relevant activity in your thematic area. So we need a definition of this collaborative fund and how you propose using that to translate needs and insights from outside of the consortium into the place that you are identifying and the thematic cluster you're identifying to draw on that full strength of the UK. So just again to note, this is to be open to institutions outside of the cluster and may include an ability to target or work with smaller those institutions that have smaller or specialized world-class portfolios. A key aspect of developing impact from research is public engagement, and we would note that for a PBIAA, we think this offers a great opportunity due to the thematic and place-based limitations or focus you're putting on this activity to be much more nuanced and targeted in the relevant public engagement, both within that target place and where appropriate beyond, maybe to draw attention to the target place that you are supporting. And as with everything we do, we particularly encourage efforts to involve and engage underrepresented groups. So I'm now moving on to some pre-existing frequently asked questions, and then Helen may be brought in to answer some questions that have been submitted live as I've been talking. So frequently asked questions number 1, do we need to have a minimum value of EPSRC grants to be eligible? No, there is no requirement. Similarly, there is no requirement to be an existing institutional IAA account holder. What we do ask you to talk about or consider is the identification of a relevant portfolio of EPS remit research commensurate with the needs of the place you're identifying. Each institution can only lead one submission. Is it possible to partner on additional bids? I think that's been covered. You can indeed lead one, but can be involved in consortia for many others as it wants or as appropriate. Reminder, you can only submit one application as a lead institution to one stream only, not one application per stream. And indeed, a PBI should align with EPSC's strategic delivery plan, but can address as many objectives within our delivery plan as are relevant in terms of the objectives of the PBI in local context, although be realistic in what you can do. And the final pre-existing question that we've put here is, will you fund bids in the same sectors or places as funded in round 1? So as stated, we will be taking a portfolio approach, but within that portfolio approach, it's entirely possible that we could see funded bids in or overlapping with the geographic areas that we funded in round 1, or indeed in similar or quite close thematic areas to round 1. Noting that different places are different. However, as stated in round 1 and also in round 2, we really encourage you to consider the need for delivery of what you're looking to do via the PBIAA mechanism with reference to the existing R&D landscape, and that R&D landscape now includes the round 1 place-based impact acceleration accounts. So if you are, for example, working in what could be seen to be the same sector, in particular, we would want to see consideration of or articulation of the importance and requirement of a PBIAA to your place, as opposed to engaging with existing PBIAAs or indeed other R&D and I infrastructures and frameworks that are in place through UKRI or other funding mechanisms. So that takes me to the end of this little section. And I'll let Anne or Sinead perhaps introduce any questions that Helen might be answering.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So we've got a couple of questions to ask, I guess, for a little bit more detail on this section. So first of all, thinking about the project lead. So are they expected to have an EPSRC track record, or is a track record in kind of the sector or the area enough?
Yeah, so as the lead, the project lead and the project team, you're not required to have a specific level of EPSRC funding or track record necessarily, but as Joe said, would expect you to be a domain expertise. So some have some expertise of working in that research area in that sector. So we will ask you for the applicant and the team track record in the application, and that will be taken into consideration by the panel. So I say it doesn't have to be EPSRC funding and track record, but we'd want to see your experience within that research area, sector and domain.
And just following on from that, again, kind of about the eligibility. So would research technical professionals be eligible as project leads or co-leads?
So it's down to you to be able to justify your track record and background in that area. I think from all the ones we've funded, it was academic leads, but with the new eligibility and roles and team roles within UKRI, technicians are eligible, and we can also have research support staff, so innovation technical professionals as well, involved in the team. So it's down to you to consider who is the most appropriate person to be the project lead, but we expect to see a broad range of different types of people and experience as required for your project. But if you've got specific questions about a person's eligibility, do come and speak to us outside of the webinar.
And so in terms of then putting the application together, so around the collaboration fund, is there a minimum and a maximum that should look like in terms of value?
No, so again, it's really what you think is best for your project. So we'd expect the consortium fund, which is for those consortium members, the university members to bid into. I would expect those consortium members to have the appropriate research base and expertise. And the collaboration fund is for those that might have some specific expertise to parts of the focus of the PBIAA to come in and do some research and impact activities that's appropriate to the cluster. So yeah, we don't define exactly what that balance should be. It is really what you think is appropriate based on what is the research expertise of the consortium and what the needs are for the place.
Yeah, and just one last question on the collaborative fund. So can it be spent to fund collaborations with international organisations?
So the money that goes out through the collaboration fund is the same eligibility to our standard funding. So it can only go to UK-based universities. There could be international partners involved in the projects, but they wouldn't be able to get the money directly.
Great, thanks. We'll let you carry on with the presentation. Come back later. More questions.
Thank you. So I'll move on to a little bit about consortia, and this may cover some of the questions that we've had already about what's expected. So we have two streams available for the PBIAA, and we have stream 1, which is for emerging or nascent clusters, and you can apply for up to £2.5 million, and stream 2 is for established clusters of up to £5 million, both for up to 4 years of funding. And as we were developing the PBIAA, the feedback from our stakeholders was that it would be appropriate to have these two streams because we want to create the opportunity for immature clusters to develop, as well as those existing clusters to grow and strengthen. But we expect the different types of clusters to have different needs. So emerging clusters are unlikely to be able to absorb as much research and funding. And we also expect the types of activities for emerging and established clusters to differ according to their needs. So it is down to you really to define and justify the maturity of your cluster. And you may find it helpful to look at the report that we published last year, the year before, around what works. That's a report that we got done as UKRI. We commissioned that, and there is a link to that on the funding finder page for the call, and we can put the link in the chat as well. So we want the consortia to include a minimum of 2 university partners who have got that research base to be drawn in. from the PBIAA. So that TRL 1 to 3 to what about 1 to 3, 1 to 4 research that can then be, that impact is delivered through the research. You can also partner with other eligible research organisations, so research organisations that might be eligible for UKRI funding, and they can partner on the bids. But we want you to consider who the most appropriate partners are to connect that research and innovation across your cluster. And particularly bringing in those universities who might have a smaller or more specialised research portfolio. So as we said earlier, we want to include those universities that don't have an existing EPSRC IAA, and we're pleased to see that they were involved in a broad range of the projects that we have funded. So there's different models to the consortia that you could take, and we've got some hypothetical examples here. So it could be that your cluster, which is the dotted line, could have all of the consortia members within that target cluster and place. Or it could be that some of the partners are within that cluster and some are from outside, and there were some examples like that within the projects that we funded. Or it could be that the consortium members are not in the place or cluster, so it could be a cluster that's in a place that's not near a university, or there could be some work with offshore wind or tidal energies, for example. But in that case, I would expect there to be some companies onshore that you'd be working with, but the cluster could expand into areas where there aren't any universities. And then another example that we've considered is that there could be two clusters that are separate geographically, but there is some unifying characteristics between them. I think we did have one example in the projects that we've funded, so between the northeast and Humber, so there is a gap there, but they've both got big chemical industries. Or there could be ports, or there could be something that connects the supply chains between the two clusters. So again, if you're wondering whether your model is eligible or appropriate, please do come and speak to us. And a reminder that we expect all applications to include a collaborative fund. As we've mentioned, we're not necessarily going to prescribe how much that should be. That's up to you how you determine the types of activities and the balance between those in terms of the funding. But this is to enable project partners from outside, collaborative partners from outside of the consortia, to engage in some of the projects. So we have been asked in the past whether you could target more than one cluster in a place, but we expect the PBIAA to focus on a theme and a place to make a cluster that can deliver a high density of related impact activity in the place. So we don't want it to be spread too thinly. So you could have multiple scientific themes being driven into a cluster if that's appropriate, but we don't want one PBIAA to be addressing multiple unrelated clusters. We don't want you to be doing too much all at once, and we feel that the standard IAA funding could be used to address multiple themes across multiple clusters. So that's something that we're avoiding in the PBIAA. So a few questions that we've had FAQs around this section. So whether a university could submit one bid as a lead to each stream. I think Joe already covered this in his section. So you can apply as a lead institution one bid in either stream, so not to both streams, but as a partner you can collaborate on more than one bid. So I briefly touched on stream 1 and stream 2, mature and emerging clusters, and we have been asked what is that evidence required to be considered a mature cluster. I think it's been asked in the Q&A here on the webinar. So we don't have a predefined list of clusters or what their maturity is. So it is for you to make that case and determine and justify which is the most appropriate stream for you and what level of maturity that cluster has. So you might want to think about the number of businesses, the size of that cluster, and the contribution that it makes to the economy. So the GVA, for example, and the absorptive capacity of that cluster. So it's not just about the maturity of the relationship between yourselves and your project partners. It's about thinking of that existing cluster and how established it is. And if you could provide some of that evidence in your bid, then we'd like to see that. We have the two streams to be able to provide the opportunity for the both types of clusters to, say, for the emerging and nascent ones to be able to grow, as well as for those established ones to strengthen and build on as well. So again, do go and take a look at that What Works report that we've published. So there's information in there that reflects on the characteristics of the different scenarios of places. So that might help you think about which is the most appropriate for your cluster as well. And just a reminder to think about the level of impact activity that the consortium and the cluster can realistically absorb in that 4-year time period. But we have said if you're, for example, supporting the development of a new technology into an existing cluster, it might be appropriate to be an emerging cluster. So that's about bringing new ideas into an existing cluster. So again, if you've got specific questions, do come and speak to us. And whether there is funding allocation assigned to each region or nation, there isn't. So bids will be assessed against the assessment criteria, and those to be judged of the highest quality and meet the assessment criteria and the scope of the call will be put forward. And we will go through some balancing of the geography and the sector and the theme, but we don't have specific funding for each place. We will take a balanced approach across the portfolio. And in relation to that, we have been asked regarding levelling up whether we will accept bids focused on the Greater South East and London. So yes, universities from all over the country, from all regions and nations are eligible to apply. It's an open competition, and we're not looking to fund any specific places. There's no restrictions on eligibility based on where you are located or where the intended impact will be. So we want to see bids from across the country, different types of universities and places. And yeah, we'll be looking to get that balanced portfolio and for you to justify the need for your place. And you'll see from the list of funded projects that we did fund one in London in the last round. So we're not excluding any part of the UK. So we've got any more questions on that section?
Yeah, so it's going to come in with a few. Joe can come back as well. So in terms of project partners and project partner contributions, what does good look like? So thinking about industry, civic, maybe NHS bodies as well.
I'm happy to pick that up. It might not be the most gratefully received answer, but good is very much, for many of these questions I'm seeing, in the context of your PBIAA. So that's in the context of the place, the partner, and the thematic area. So I think it's really understanding the contextual value of that support. So both in terms of a civic body or indeed an industry partner, understanding why their contribution is as it is and why that is going to drive value to the PBIAA is more important to us and the panel, and that's how we were devising the panel, than the specific cash value number associated with any support that might be being given.
And so similar to a previous question, so can partners be from outside of the UK?
So one can conceive, as Helen said, a scenario where you are working with partners outside of the UK. Again, the thing we'd be having to look at there is obviously the eligibility in terms of their involvement. I would encourage people to also think about other responsible research and trusted research implications of use of project partners from different countries. But also that with that no direct transfer, we'd really need of funding, and the fact that all funding and activities need to be focused on the place, we would need to be able to understand why there was that involvement of the international partner adding benefit. But if they are indeed adding benefit, then there isn't a specific restriction to involving international project partners.
And so in terms of letters of support then from these project partners, is it better to have them from individual companies or representative bodies or networks or clusters?
So I'm going to link back to my previous point and say that the really important thing for us and for you to demonstrate to the panel is the specific nature of the support, their involvement, their interest. I think one of the ways that we suggest you think about whether or not someone is a civic body, for example, is do they have a specific remit and responsibility for working in or developing in a place. So that would be what we would like to see come through any articulations of support, whether that's in a letter or embedded within the proposal. And I think similarly for involvement of, for example, industry project partners, it would be about understanding why the work or why they have that interest in working in projects that are going to be in that specific place and thematic area is so exciting to them and their sort of involvement in the project from that perspective.
And so I guess it's linked again to your answers already. Yeah. But how within the kind of the restricted length of the application form, how would one best demonstrate co-creation with a civic body?
Yeah, so I think what we're really looking for is, let's say you are a net zero academic, you obviously think net zero is the most important thing for your area. I'm going to, or place that you're identifying, I'm going to suggest that you might. What we find really compelling through round one, where it was clear that the objectives of the PBIAA had been developed with and ratified by the civic body and or multiple civic bodies, indeed, may well reference how those objectives were arrived on, and indeed maybe existing civic body literature that supports that. And then also in your articulation of how you're going to be delivering the activities and management and governance of the PBIAA, strong proposals. It was clear how those civic body or bodies were going to be involved in that governance, management, delivery of those PBIAA activities. And that's what really was compelling in terms of evidence of co-creation.
And do the kind of all of the project partners have to be from the same region or in the same region as your application cluster?
No, not at all. I mean, in a way, it's the same answers for those international project partners, and it's the same answer actually as to some questions I've seen about the location of consortium members. There's no specific geographic requirement or link necessary between anyone involved in a PBIAA and the place that you're identifying. But what needs to be made clear, or I would encourage you to make clear, is why you have chosen that set of consortium members and why you're involving those project partners as being the most appropriate sort of cohort of individuals, entities, stakeholders to the needs of your place and thematic sort of cluster.
And I guess so then the last question that I'm going to ask in this section is just to ask you to provide a bit more information on what we mean by cluster. So emerging versus established, geographic versus industrial. Yeah,
so I think what we've observed as a team that goes around places is it's very difficult unless you're in the place to know what a place might need. And in fact, this is a problem that many people are struggling with articulating, I think. So what we are looking, so hence, as Helen said as well, we don't have any predefined lists. We're actually excited to see, and we were excited through round one, your articulations of what the relevant cluster is in the context of the PBIAA scheme. So, for example, that could be a cluster, I'm thinking of something, automotive engineering in the Midlands, for example. Many people would describe that as an established cluster because it's been going for a number of years, but actually maybe you have a vision about an emerging technology applied in that field and a cluster that would be supporting that you would say is actually no, in this case, it's an emerging or nascent opportunity that we're working with. So again, it's also around whether you feel the types of activities that you need to do are more aligned to support that place in that cluster or more emerging activities, maybe capacity building, or maybe it's more for an established cluster where you might be looking at more product development type activities. Again, in terms of those geographies, it's what's appropriate for that context. If you look at the awarded examples in round one, you will see those geographies go from what's something that maybe is not much bigger than a business park type area, or admittedly quite a large business park type area, all the way up to county level type regions. But what we're looking for is that there's a clear narrative around why that's the appropriate geography that matches to that industry cluster. I mean, primarily industry cluster. I've seen comments around NHS trusts and similar, which could indeed be delivering the impact depending on the area you're working in, and may be another way of defining that cluster. I hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Joe. I think we'll move on to the next section.
Okay, I'll try and take people through this a little pace to try and include time for a few more general questions. So as you're aware, EPSRC is transitioning to all applications being submitted through the funding service, which is replacing our previous application system, GES. The PBIAA round 2 is being run on the funding service. So we would encourage you to acquaint yourself with all of the guidance that is going out around that process, and indeed the specific aspects for this call, which will be materially be different from round 1, which was held under GES. So in terms of the approach to the application process, we are moving towards a question and answer format, which should make it easier, and next slide if that's okay, for the applicants to explain their ideas and easier for assessors to review it. Central to this is that we have core question sets. These questions and areas of assessment have been developed from question sets and assessment criteria previously used in funding opportunities across UKRI, and the ideas across all schemes, not just PBIAAs. Questions are more harmonized. Additionally, we can include opportunity-specific criteria, as we have done for the PBIAA. So in terms of how you do your application, the submission through TFS is made clear on the information on the funding finder, including for PBIAA round 2, it's all there already. You start the application via this funding finder page, and you will need to ensure that you are signed in or created a funding service account to be able to do that. So don't leave that step too late. You will answer all questions, or in effect, create your application by answering directly in the text box. And indeed, all of the questions, which are themselves the one-to-one map to the assessment criteria, are listed in the How to Apply section of the Funding Finder page. And there are a number of webinars and other training resources that you can use to help learn more about the funding service specifically. So when we look at the core application questions and areas of assessment, and effectively each of these is a separate box and section of your application. For PBIAA round 2, we have a section on your vision, a separate section on your approach, one section covering the applicant and team capability to deliver, a section for you to define your resources and justify your costs, a section common to all applications around ethics and responsible research and innovation considerations, and some PBIAA specific criteria covering aspects to do with place. So we include on the slide, this next slide, which we will shortly share, a number of useful links that you may need just in terms of the specifics of that application. And again, I would highlight the guidance we've put in the funding finder around those different criteria and how we're looking to assess them. I'll conclude with a summary slide, which just only states information that we've already previously said. So just with a view on time, I'll cut straight now to the final question section, where I think both Helen and I will attempt to field as many questions as we can in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Thank you both. I haven't assigned these questions, so feel free to jump in. So I guess starting big and then maybe going to some more specific questions. So can you speak more to the idea of portfolio balance, what this means within the context of the PBIAA scheme, but also the wider EPSRC strategy, strategic objectives, kind of the science areas that are identified in the strategy?
Yeah, I can take that to start with, and Joe, jump in if you want to add anything. So we will, when we have the panel and assessment for this round, we will make sure that we are balanced across round 1 and 2. So in terms of the geography and the sectors and the EPSRC science priority areas as well. As we're also looking at the wider context and what else is going on. So it's down to you to make that case that your PBIA is needed in terms of the scientific theme, the sector, and the place. And we will be assessing against quality primarily, against the assessment criteria. But we will want to make sure that once we've got those high quality applications, we can then, if we've got more quality applications than we have budget, we may then need to pick to balance across the geographies and the sectors as well.
And so we've had another question that's just asking to clarify what we mean around place and the definition of place. Big question. Do you want to say that one, Joe?
Just the definition of place, it should be, you're free to define it as you wish, but it should be clear what that place is. I don't know if that feels a bit like a tautology, but because we are aware that different scales of place are relevant in different ways for different areas, feel free to draw your map or more likely describe a geography that is the relevant geography for your place. So obviously that does need to be there because we need to be able, or the panel needs to understand the sort of boundary of that place in a clear sort of narrative fashion. But beyond that, it's to you to, I suppose, explain why you have defined that sort of boundary and extent.
And so moving to the peer review process, will there be the same panel for the prioritization panel and the interview panel? What will that look like in terms of the membership?
So yeah. I was going to say, I think I answered this live, but just to say that we would, we may need, for example, a bigger panel actually for the invite stage as to the panel stage. We would be looking for strong consistency of where possible, and there's a slight logistical aspect on this membership, in particular on that chair and co-chair, but also of expertise, and we would indeed potentially balance that expertise depending on who was being invited to interview. But to note that we would be seeking consistency, although it's not fully in place yet, that panel. I don't know if Helen wants to add anything to that.
No, but yeah, just to say we will have more panel members for the initial SIF panel than we will have for the interview, but there will be some consistency and pull over for panel members between the two interview and the outline panel between the two stages.
And is a levelling up lens applied to the assessment?
Again, I think I answered this in the written, but the assessment process, as for any opportunity, particularly under TFS, is directly linked to the questions and our sub-criteria within those questions. While obviously a number of the goals and aspirations of the PBIAA align with some of the aspirations that people talk about when they talk about levelling up, we do not have a levelling up criteria, and such. That is not a conversation that would form part of the analysis of the assessment criteria or the scrutiny of the PBIAAs. We're very much looking about how we drive the best possible impact from EPS research. That is our job.
And if the question is in terms of where the investments are going, so as I said, we'll make sure that we've got that balance across geographies all around the UK. And as I mentioned earlier, there's not specific places that have got certain amounts of funding, and we will include projects from the Greater South East if they are the best projects to fund.
And so in terms of those who applied to round one and may have been unsuccessful, are there any rules around resubmissions, or are there any tips for those applicants? This is the question.
So they will have all been provided with feedback and should have been told whether we will accept a resubmission or not. But if you've not had that conversation with us, please do come and speak to us. We will allow some resubmissions from round one. Of course, the feedback that's been provided will need to be addressed, but please do come and speak to us about that.
So I guess some more kind of specific questions now. So as the scope for the projects to be university spin-outs, how does that translate into IP ownership between the universities?
Yeah, happy to sort of try and pick that up. I mean, that can be quite, well, very project specific. So I suppose the main point I'll be making there is we would be expected to be considered in a project specific fashion, sort of in line with EPSRC's more general guidance around management of IP, and indeed, just effectively making sure that you're considering what is the best route to drive impact from those research outputs? Is it an IP type route, or is it one of the other routes that you can use to be driving impact from your research outputs?
And so can the project fund be spent to cover the time of colleagues working in civic organizations or businesses, or are there examples of how businesses can benefit from the collaboration fund?
Yeah, I suppose I can pick that up and Helen can maybe add. We are aware that there may be a requirement to find ways to ensure the involvement of certain people. That could be done normally through basically invoicing for a service provided, or indeed invoicing for an activity as part of a project. I think the care and consideration we would ask people to make is actually, and in particular with the case of civic bodies, where those people may already be paid by government funding, there can be some implications as to their ability to be seconded out and involved in that way. In many cases, and through round one, we've actually seen that because the PBIAA is seeking to deliver, for example, the goal of the relevant civic body, there's a sufficient alignment in activity that there's not been that requirement. But if there is a requirement to specifically second people out, and that's an option available to them, then that will be an allowable sort of project-specific cost. I don't know if Helen wants to add anything to that.
Yes, I typed an answer to this one. I wasn't quite sure what the question was referring to. So if it was in terms of academic colleagues working with those civic partners and businesses, perhaps through the secondment, then that could be eligible. We can't fund directly the civic colleagues and business colleagues to work on the projects. So we expect them to be contributing so a contribution of theirs to the project could be that time and that salary contribution of their staff working on the project. And that's one way of doing the in-kind and cash contributions. So we can't fund civic and business colleagues directly, but there are ways for them to be working with us.
And so one last question. So can you give examples of the type of public engagement activity that might be possible with a place-based impact acceleration account, and how they might align with the other civic and business activities?
I'll make a start. I'm just thinking of some of the examples that we had through the funded projects. So I think particularly the skills angle. So encouraging people to work in the sector that the PBIAA is focused on, and particularly those underrepresented groups, and delivering that outreach of the science and the projects into the community. And if appropriate, getting the public and communities involved in aspects of the research and how it will affect them. Anything more to add, Joe?
Yeah, I suppose I would say, which I think I tried to say, that the focus of the PBIAA maybe allows you to think a bit more targeted into the various types of public, and public is not just random people on the street. Maybe you're working in aerospace and there's specific aerospace trade bodies, for example, which could represent a public, or indeed policy individuals that could represent a public that you're looking to engage with. And indeed, because you're working in a specific place and looking to benefit that place, there may be specific subsets of people in that place where there's a benefit to do that quite targeted public engagement. And because you know that in advance, what place it is and what theme it is, that you may be able to be a little bit more defined and perhaps inventive in terms of what you're looking to do in that public engagement than via some of our other mechanisms.
Thanks both. I think there's still a couple of questions to go, but I think we'll pick those up in a Q&A that we'll publish after. And I think Helen and Joe have been answering questions in the Q&A function as well. So I'll wrap that up there and hand back to you, Helen and Joe. Yeah,
thanks everyone. And as Sinead said, we'll publish a Q&A of the questions that we have and haven't been able to answer, as well as the recording and the slides from today for your own reference and to share with colleagues.